Hello everyone. I would like to welcome you to Signal Center's Accessibility Awareness Summit hosted by Chattanooga State Community College. Chattanooga State wants everyone, regardless of our different abilities, to achieve our full potential. The time has come to place accessibility in the center of our social, political, institutional, and economic thinking. As a strong sign of Chattanooga State's commitment to inclusion, we are excited to announce our first ever Belonging Center. Our inclusive focused staff will work closely with the Center for Access and Disability Services. Our mission is to create a welcoming, inclusive, engaging, and supportive environment. That means we are dedicated to offering learning support services to all students with varying abilities, as well as supporting our diverse group of employees. Like each of you, Chattanooga State believes that all humans can be accommodated and included in the rich diversity of our shared spaces. Signal Centers and Chattanooga State are deeply committed to creating an accessible learning community where individuals have an equal opportunity to pursue their educational goals, framed through a lens of equity and access. We look forward to a wonderful and dynamic conference. Again, on behalf of Signal Centers and Chattanooga State, I'm delighted to say welcome.
Thank you to our sponsors: McKee Family Bakery, EPB, Chambliss, TVFCU, TVA, Chattanooga State Community College, Tennessee Aquarium, Tennessee Council on Developmental Disabilities, Tennessee Captel, Tennessee Relay, the Enterprise Center, University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and Partnership for Families, Children, and Adults.
Thank you so much for attending our fourth Accessibility Awareness Summit. We think these transformative conversations are important for our community to have together, and we are so glad that you chose to join us today.
Can you confirm, can you see my screen? And can you hear me? Yes? The interpreter, thank you so much. Okay, sorry for that. I'm doubly sorry that I'm not present with you in Chattanooga. So I want to take a special thanks to the extraordinary Marge Fleming. The amount of work that she puts into this is like nothing I've seen before. And of course, Donna McConico in her leadership at Signal Centers. So through diversity to richer experiences for all, you've seen that title. Now I want to share with you what I've been thinking about in the context of that. And this looks like way too much. I am your table setter, and you have an amazing menu today. But I want to go through some things very quickly that your agenda and your work have inspired in me. First of all, who are we? Who are we talking about? Disability in the intersection with cultural diversity. Thinking differently, I want to share some Native American perspectives because I think they are really illustrative of thinking differently and how fundamentally we need to think differently. And enough already. This is from happy talk about diversity and inclusion to really thinking about how to create consequential impact. What's design got to do with it? My focus is on the role of design. And I'll explain to you why I think it's also your focus. Learning from diverse people, building information to inform action. I know of no other way that one can do this responsibly except by listening and engagement. And I'm going to show you a few examples of richer experiences through diversity that happen to be current favorites of mine. So who are we? I am blessed to run an international organization that is all about the role of design in social equity across the spectrum of ability, age, and culture. And every day is different. Every day feeds my enthusiasm. What do? We do education and training. We do mission-driven consulting and design services. And we do a great deal of research. The participatory research is the way to learn from real people and build data to inform action of all kinds. And I want to share just a couple of thoughts from some of my favorite people. Maya Angelou, if you are always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be. And I know Signal Center's staff sees this every day. Amazing is part of what you do. This is somebody that I trust you probably have heard of, Todd Rose. I think he came to all of our attention with his wonderful book, The End of Average. And sometimes a dimension of ability that appears to be a weakness becomes a strength in the right context. And I think, again, I suspect you believe that is true, as do I. A quick note on the pattern of disability today and the global story. We're talking about 1 in 7 people. I promise you that is an undercount, but it is the world's largest minority. In the United States, quite a different story in that we have a much higher rate of disability than the world at large. We're looking at 61 million American adults with disabilities. Again, the largest minority in the United States. It's 40% of people 65 and over who often don't self-identify as having a disability. Why is it so different here? And it's partly because we gather more data about disability. It's partly because we count everyone to the end of life. The Japanese stopped counting disability at 60. If you're not in the workforce, they figure it doesn't matter. Counts the spectrum of brain-based conditions, which I know is a central part of your mission. And this is a heartbreak to me that so many countries still have attitudinal barriers there. And many countries don't count chronic health conditions, as is so important in our culture and sadly rising for children and for adults. This is where we begin to see the dramatic intersection with issues of race and culture. So the 40% people 65 and older, when you look at the 26% of American adults with disabilities, you've got to unpack it because it's not the same for everyone. So older people, 40%, the same enormous number for non-Hispanic Indigenous people. And this is a small population today in the United States, but that is a crushing reality for that community. And for Black Americans, we have 25% have a disability. And I have to tell you that the data is so weak for Latinos and for the Asian community that we can't actually say what that proportion is. And just a reminder, because so many Americans believe that disability is either people who use wheeled mobility or people who are blind and read Braille, and it's so not that reality. Most physical and mental conditions are along a continuum of severity. Non-apparent conditions are the norm. Overwhelming majority of disabilities are acquired over the course of life, certainly not all of them. And self-identification as a person with a disability is a choice. It doesn't work for everyone. So when we ask people in the American Community Survey, we never ask, do you have a disability? We always ask, do you have difficulty? Difficulty seeing, difficulty concentrating, difficulty climbing stairs. And we have to be sensitive to what people are comfortable with. I am cautious about big academic words, but I think we're all talking about the phenomenon of intersectionality today, which is one of those big words. And I want to credit Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly has been talking about this since 1989. She is a pioneer in getting people to recognize that we need to recognize where inequality intersects with different experiences. And I think we all owe her a debt of gratitude for trying to bring attention to this, which I think has finally begun to have traction just in the last 2 years. In the state of Tennessee, the data from the CDC, the National Center on Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities, who produces this, and they produce it for every state in the union. And I think it's important as we begin today that Tennessee exceeds the nation rather dramatically in the prevalence or the incidence of disability. 32%, not 26, but 32% of the adult population in Tennessee have disabilities. 1 in 3, not 1 in 4. And it's important, I think, to note that you have a pattern of still having the largest number of people with mobility limitations, but cognition or the brain-based spectrum is rapidly reaching equity. And in my part of the world, in the 6 states in New England, brain-based reasons for disability, the cognition category, is already number one. And in the whole state of California, number one. And I want to introduce this notion of thinking differently. I have derived tremendous satisfaction from exploring this and want to credit Dr. Hilary Weaver, who is a Lakota and one of the handful of people who has done extensive work on this. And there's a reference at the back, so you'll be able to look up her book. But a perspective on disability that is fundamentally different. And I think it's particularly apt for Chattanooga. I'm sure all of you are well aware, though I am only recently aware, of the Cherokee Ross brothers at Ross's Landing that became Chattanooga. And that you are part of the National Park Service Trail of Tears, which I know about mostly from the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian in Washington. And I hope one day to visit the actual Trail of Tears. There's only 0.3% Native Americans left in Tennessee, but a deep history in the land of the Cherokee and other tribes. And I think we can learn something that is really important to think about from the Native American tradition, and one that I think can inform our work and our goals of inclusion. So the 40% rate of disability, I think let's just deal with that first. This is a sad fact, and it persists for children and youth and adults. It is pervasive. And I'm using here a symbol from Chattanooga. I've got an image in the corner of one of the ceremonial discs that celebrate Cherokee culture, that is the passage at your riverfront park. So why is the Native American community so distinguished by high rates of disability? High rates of poverty, that's one of those intersectional issues. High rates of accidents, high rates of being in the front line in combat. High recruitment into the military, high rates of environmental pollution, often based on the reservation lands, and physical and mental impact of racism and colonization, not unique to Native Americans, but certainly a reality for them. This is where we start getting into a big idea. So they have a different worldview of disability, have a different value. And this is another image on the upper left of another one of those discs from your park. But independence and autonomy are really where we start out when we think about our goals for equity and accessibility and inclusion for people with disability, because independence and autonomy dominates our culture. Those are the aspirations that we bring into the discussion about disability. We also emphasize disability as identity. And we've been doing that since the late 70s, and it's been enormously important for a lot of people. It also leaves a lot of people out because identity is not what they're looking for. They may have the reality of a functional limitation or a disability, but they do not choose an identity. And we must be sensitive to that. And it's big enough to be a worldview. It's not just the values, it's how we see ourselves in the world. Native Americans have a different worldview. And that notion of independence is supplanted by interdependence as a core value. I trust that many of you are where I am over the last 2.5 years. If we haven't noticed our interdependence, we haven't been paying any attention. The other issue that I find absolutely compelling among Native Americans in thinking about disability is a focus on balance in context, not just on the individual, but balance with a group. And identity focused on the role in one's family and one's tribe, rather than what differentiates us, that people each have something to contribute. And I think that's another way of looking at the same aspirations, but one that I think can prove valuable. And just a point about how language matters. There are 67 words for disability in the federal government. 67, just in the codes of the federal government. There aren't any words for disability in most Native American language. Nothing, none exist. And they have no slang terms, no disparaging slang terms. So there is something to be learned from that culture. what is it that I think is worthy of taking forward and helping us to think through to another way of being and another way of achieving what we aspire to? An appreciation of interdependence. I just think that is a central notion that we really need to grab. A focus on balance, very important. And how can we imagine refreshing our value? Living the life they choose is always something that I talk about. What do we aspire to for people with disabilities? I think we might also want to consider, what does each person uniquely bring to their context, their family, their community? Now I want to talk about a perspective that is actually coming from quite a different pair of good thinkers. And these are professors at the Harvard Business School. And one of them is a woman who has been a leader on issues of integration and equity for women, and also for culturally diverse communities. And the other is a former president of Morehouse College. And they are serious talkers about not putting up with any baloney. They are looking for, how do we get to consequential impact? So here's the article, and I'll share that with you at the end. But they've been talking about this same idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion for 25 years. And they've been writing about it in this highly visible periodical that has a great deal of influence. And they're mad. They're upset. And I think we need to listen to that, because I think there's something terribly important about the insight of people who've been on a very valuable bully pulpit for a long time. And this enough already with false claims of the impact, when there's been scant attention to what it takes to really impact how we do things. Platitudes give comfort. And boy, there's a lot of platitudes out there. Everybody's got a platform on what they're going to do to achieve a greater level of integration and belonging. But it's not all having much impact. And I think it can too readily be accepted without unpacking. How do you measure? How do you actually know if it's making a difference? And it can be extremely dangerous, because if it's not actually making a difference in richness of experience, or in some cases, the bottom line, it's not going to be sustained. And that makes it extremely dangerous to use platitudes instead of substantive measures of, are we really doing it? We need to be rethinking and we constituting success very clearly with equity, creativity, innovation, flexibility, and respect. Respect has got to be a part of it. And I think that's one of the things that is too often missing. It's too often about diverse people somehow being incorporated and reflecting the same old, same old. And if that doesn't work, then it's failed. That's not what it's about. The first order of business, building trust. If there is not trust, there is no progress. Those in charge build trust by creating an environment where people feel safe to express themselves freely, not to morph themselves into looking like the same old, same old. Set a tone of honest communication. A lot of what we're going to have to go through in order to get where we want to go is uncomfortable. And we've got to be willing to value honesty over comfort. But get comfortable with vulnerability, one's own and others, because this game is partly about change that demands that we're vulnerable, that we don't know how to get there exactly. And we're going to have to make changes we can't always anticipate. We need to shine a spotlight on every process and habit of thought in an organization. I focus on that idea of habit of thought. I'm sure you all know organizations where if you really focus on identifying habits of thought, you're going to come up with a pretty good diagnosis of why it's not working. Always to be thinking about who's disadvantaged, who's left out. Assess patterns that make assumptions, about people and about what's acceptable. Too often we condemn people to too few opportunities and too few attractive challenges. Figure out what habits and behavior fight a commitment to diversity. We've been looking a lot at the future of work and very, very nervous that mentoring and second chances are available to some and not to others. It's astonishing how much people don't recognize when they're doing second chances for people who are already quite advantaged. Take a hard look at hiring and interviewing. Are the standardized artificial intelligence systems baked into recruitment and interview processes? I urge you to look at that. This is a pattern across the nation. It is deeply embedded at this point in hiring, and it is dangerous for diversity. And beware, one of the things that we are getting lots of feedback on lately, get all the way to the end of the hiring process, and then somebody says, oh, but you're just not a good fit with our culture. Right? See what that's all about. And people get away with it every day of the week. And last, embrace a wide wide range of styles and voices. A commitment to diversity means being willing to leave behind rigid ideas about how things get done and about how people look and how people talk and what people need to feel confident, which is critical to good work, and valued. What's design got to do with it? You know, I come from the idea that design is a tool of change. And I'm going to give one last quote to a very important economist who made an enormous contribution to many of the things that drive our thinking today, including a great deal of the thinking of the innovation economy. But I want to make it clear that I'm not talking about trained designers exclusively. Everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. If that isn't what Signal Center does every day, I can't think of who could do it better. It is that notion of what is could be better. I want to share with you why this is so important, because I want to share with you the gold standard on how we think about disability across the world. It's a great advantage for somebody like me who works around the world, and we can have this conversation because we share an understanding based on World Health Organization definition. And it's important. I don't have to belabor it a lot, but it came about 21 years ago, and it was a fundamental rethinking. Functional limitation is a universal human experience. You live a normal lifespan, you will experience functional limitation, regardless of lifespan in your nation. It's a human norm. Equity between mental and physical reasons for functional limitation, critically important fact. Focus on the potent role of context, on the person interacting with the environment, physical, information, communication, attitude. And again, this is what you change every day. You change the context. Part of what we're doing is not just removing barriers. This is about facilitating independence, maybe interdependence, experience, equity, and participation. And one of the things they called for back in 2001, was that universal or inclusive design is the most promising framework for changing that context. And this is very central to my work and the work that IHCD does. This notion of a framework that helps us think about humanity-centered design of everything with everyone in mind. Back in 1997, we, along with 4 other organizations in the US, created the principles of universal design. They're practical principles of making things work for everybody. This is just ordinary ideas about how to have people at the center of the design process. You can't have people at the center of the design process if you aren't simultaneously building information about people that you need to do this well. And I know that you are committed around participation, around listening, and around engagement. And I can't stress how significant this is. If I have a dream every day of the week, I would hope that the innovation economy, which is such a loud drumbeat in our nation, started doing a whole lot more listening to people like the people you serve that can provide golden nuggets about how to do workarounds for people who don't have full functional ability, who have a genius for figuring out how to make life work. Real people interacting with real environments, physical and digital. This is kind of what we do every day. In the last week, we've dealt with autonomous cars with a wonderful museum, and we have teams out today who are working on public transit. And it's just the only way we're going to get this information. The accessibility standards are focused on too few people. We have very little in the way of information to guide the creation of contexts that work better, particularly for people with non-apparent conditions like chronic health and the whole spectrum of brain-based reasons for disability. I'm just showing you some images of some of our user experts, very varied group of people. And they range, the people we work with range from teenagers to people in their late 80s. And I want to close with a few samples. I want to prove to you, not that I think you are a hard sell for believing that richer experiences are available and that we can pull this off, but I want to share some stories. I'm of a belief, probably as I get older, more and more, I'm a believer that stories actually are the way we change. So I want to share some of my favorite stories of the last year. This is a remarkable place. Maybe some of you have been there. This is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you probably are well aware that Tulsa has a tragic American story of destroying in the 20s what was known as Black Wall Street, absolute destruction of a wildly successful Black downtown. And they have yet to really figure out how to repair that scar and how to build a Tulsa that is defined by other things. And this is one of those efforts. So this is called the Gathering Place. And I would admit it is a project that is only possible because a lot of rich people put up a lot of money to make this happen. But it is a place where no one has to spend a cent to go. It is a very large public riverfront park. There's free transportation from the neighborhoods and from downtown. They have 100 years of funding for maintenance in the bank. And it is really a deliberate intent to create a place where people who wouldn't rub shoulders with one another come together. And they come together because there's so much to do. It's such an extraordinary place of experience and opportunity for children and for adults. And I'd have to say that one of the realities here is that the primary resources behind this is from a very wealthy man whose family were Jewish refugees from Germany. And he has been extraordinarily blessed in his experience in America. And he knows that hasn't been the case for everybody in America. And he saw no more important work that he could do but to invent a new place for being together, all at the same level. And this is just a delightful small story. This is a Discovery Museum. This is their treehouse addition to the museum. And when they began this process with a company called the Treehouse Guys out of, I think, Vermont, the idea that this was going to focus on children who used wheelchairs and children who were blind and read Braille. So it was a very different design. And we had the opportunity to weigh in and to help them think about it, give them a little bit of demographic data. That's not actually the pattern of disability among children today. You really need to be thinking about a different set of experiences that will resonate for children and give them choices that work for them. So we ended up with this design for the treehouse so that children, particularly that spectrum of children with learning disabilities, who are neurodiverse, who have behavioral health issues, have choices to pull away from the crowd, to tuck into places underneath, to play independently if they want to, and to join others when they're ready. But it was just a wonderful experience where parents really came into the process of working out this design, as did children. This is something that we're all dealing with across the country. It's the phenomenon of how do we respond to the tragedy of homeless families. And this is a project from a nonprofit in Portland, Oregon, that was overwhelmed by the volume of homeless families and the deplorable conditions that were available for temporary housing. And working with a couple of designers, including a landscape designer who created this marvelous playground, they listened to the families, and they were overwhelmed by the prevalence of the experience of trauma for the adults and the children. And so they had a vision of creating a family shelter that was a place that anyone would enjoy being, and that was informed by design for people who have experienced trauma. And they had an old church not used, and they were able to secure that and to create an environment that is warm and comfortable and that uses curves. You know, that there's no harsh right angles in this space. This is a space that aligns with the human body. You know, we don't have any right angles, and they have been wonderfully successful. This former church is serving 25 homeless families a night. And as I'm sure you're well aware, homeless families are overrepresented by adults and children with disabilities. And this is one that you probably wouldn't be aware of because it's from Tokyo. And I have the pleasure of serving every year on an annual, on an international design jury. And we have never had a candidate for a design award that was quite like this. So it's the Social Good Coffee Roasters out of Tokyo. And they, a group of young entrepreneurs, decided that they really wanted to create a different way of training people with cognitive limitations to become successful employees, and added a cool factor. So they basically created a company that creates baristas out of people with cognitive disabilities. And they have been wonderfully successful. They have already graduated from the program 30 people who are working for other coffee shops. Coffee, as you might not realize, is very popular in Japan, particularly the highest quality, fancy coffee shops. So these kids are all getting good jobs. But it was a wonderful combination of thinking differently, of recognizing that this was a trend and one that they wanted to piggyback on and create a whole new way for people to think about the employment of people with disabilities, partly by adding this idea of it being cool. So just a story I had to share. And then one more story out of employment, and you may well know all about Ernst & Young's initiative. Ernst & Young is actually the largest professional services firm in the entire world, based in London. And I am proud to say that last year they opened the 6th Neurodiverse Center of Excellence in Boston. And the quote from this woman who's, she doesn't specialize in neurodiversity. She's the office managing principal here. And that this Center for Excellence will not only transform the way we help our clients across New England, but it underscores our deep commitment to diversity, inclusiveness, and opportunity for all. And recognizing these team members bring unique skills to the firm and will be able to support clients through innovative work and thinking. And I think we're at a moment of such potential for this kind of story to become ordinary. But telling these stories is one way to give people the confidence that it's possible. This will be available to all of you after the event, but I wanted to share some of my references. And last point, build muscles to be open to different ways of thinking and being. And let's think about this shift from independence to interdependence. What is the shame in interdependence? I think we need to play it out. And I think we've all learned to live with the breaking apart of normal and average over the last 2 years. We've got big muscles for flexibility, but now let's move towards a willingness to intentional vulnerability that opens us to new and richer experiences. And I know that you have what it takes to do that. And I am proud to have an opportunity to talk to you this morning. So I thank you, and I wish you a terrific day and all good wishes and good health. Thank you.